The member for Coburn.
Madam Speaker, I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. This land always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Can I say at the outset, Madam Speaker, how pleased I am to begin my speech with those words. I congratulate you on your historic election to the role of Speaker. It caps an accomplished career as a Labor member and minister. It is also fitting, if overdue, that a woman sits as Speaker on the centenary of Edith Cowan's election, and also a few years shy of the centenary of the election of May Holman, the first Labor woman elected to this place, and indeed to any parliament in Australia. I look forward to the day when there will be no novelty in members using the phrase Madam Speaker in this chamber.
Yeah.
It is the privilege of my life to have been elected to represent my local community as the member for Coburn. I am indebted to the Labor Party and to the voters of Coburn for giving me the opportunity to serve in this place. I acknowledge particularly the big shoes that I have to fill in succeeding the Honourable Fran Logan as the member for Coburn. Fran led many community campaigns, such as cleaning up Coburn cement, and he was a reformist minister who most recently brought many of our corrections facilities back into public hands. I wish Fran and Vivian the very best in their well-deserved retirement.
Yeah.
Madam Speaker, I was born into a Labor family. My dad, Roy, was a child of the Depression who believed passionately in the objective of the Labor Party in bringing better conditions to all people without hope of personal gain. My mum, Catherine, is a Nannup girl whose quiet, hard-working nature typifies the backbone of the Labor Party. I was raised on a steady diet of politics. Labor Party branch meetings and fundraising dinners were the norm, so much so that I feel uncomfortable at an event if there's no raffle. I remember watching a clip from Question Time when I was a kid and asking my dad who was the bad guy. He explained solemnly that John Howard was the bad guy and Paul Keating was the good guy. I thereafter enthusiastically shouted, "Put him in the green wheelie bin," every time John Howard appeared on TV. Few things were more important in our family than the Labor Party, but chief amongst those was education. I was fortunate to receive a first-class public education at Australind Primary School and Australind Senior High School. I owe much to my trajectory in life to the brilliant teachers and other staff who invested in me in my early years. I give particular thanks to Greg Slavin, who was the principal of Australind Senior High School while I was there. Greg pushed me to do better and opened doors for me, and I know he did that for all students. He represents the very best of the public education system. I was pleased to later return to my high school as a board member at Greg's invitation. Because of the education I received at Australind, I was able to secure a Fogarty Foundation regional scholarship to study arts and law at the University of Western Australia. I found it difficult to fit in at UWA. I discovered quickly that my path was not the typical path taken by most of my peers at UWA Law School. I had gone to public schools. I was a country boy. And my parents were not lawyers or judges. Indeed, no one in my family had attended university until my older sister did 2 years before me. Fortunately, I eventually found my people. I made fast friends with people who shared my values of fairness, equality, and inclusion. People like Mike Workman and Tim Goyder, who, like me, viewed the law as a political tool and not as a merely academic or commercial exercise. I was also invited at that time by the Honourable Dr. Sally Talbot to drinks with what she described as a group of like-minded people. I met the Honourable Stephen Dawson, the Honourable Alana Clossy, Senator Louise Pratt, and many others who would go on to be employers, friends and mentors to me. I found the metalworkers and I found my political family. I am a strong believer in lifelong learning. And in 2019, I finally uprooted myself from Perth and moved to the United Kingdom to study a Master of Laws at University College London. Again, I was fortunate to benefit from great teachers, taught and supervised by some of Europe's best labour lawyers. That was until I called my wife Ellie in early 2020. Ellie had remained in Australia. I told Ellie that this COVID-19 situation seemed pretty serious and that it might be a good idea for me to come home. Thankfully, I did just that. I ended up writing my thesis remotely on the experience of Qantas workers, many of whom have been stood down without pay for months on end while the pandemic rages. When I look back at my life and education, the common thread is how much I owe to education, and particularly public education and to the work of other people. I was raised by a family who loved and supported me. I was encouraged at school and university by teachers who saw more in me than I did. I was mentored by colleagues in the Labor Party and the law who recognised a kindred spirit. To that extent, my story reflects the objective of the Labor Party, which is surely to build a society that allows a kid from Australind to attend world-class universities and crack into the exclusive club of the legal profession. My story may be the story of yet another lawyer who stumbled into this place, but it is also fundamentally a story about fairness, equality, and inclusion. But it is not really my story that drove me to serve in this place. Instead, it is the stories of the many vulnerable and exploited workers who I have represented as a lawyer with both Slater and Gordon and Eureka lawyers. Women who were sacked for being pregnant, cleaners and disability support workers who were badly underpaid, migrant workers who were threatened with deportation. If it weren't for the union movement and the Labor Party, the stories of those workers would often go unheard. I hope to do my part by being a voice and being a warrior for those workers in this place. Today, I want to start that work by telling you about one of those workers, one of my former clients, Lavanita Singh Viraragu. I am grateful to Lavanita for giving me permission to use her name and story in this place. I met Lavanita in February 2018 when she was referred to me for pro bono assistance. Lavanita had started working as a cook on a 457 visa for a chain of restaurants known as the Local Shack in February 2015. In mid-October 2017, Lavanita finished her shift, but then stayed back when another employee failed to turn up for the next shift. However, after 45 minutes, she could stay no longer because she had to pick up her child from daycare. At about 10 p.m. that night, Lavanita spoke by phone with the general manager of the Local Shack, Bradley David Wright. Mr. Wright asked Lavanita why she wasn't still at work. When she explained that her shift had finished, he went on a tirade and abused her. The federal court ultimately found that he said to her things like, "Why the fuck am I paying you if you are not there, and you should still fucking be there?" After the call ended, Lavanita began crying. Her husband Kumaran called Mr. Wright back and asked why he had made Lavanita cry. The federal court again found that Mr. Wright responded, "Why the fuck do I have to talk to you? I sponsored you guys. I can cancel your visa anytime I like." The next day, Lavanita took personal leave and submitted a medical certificate. In response, she was told by the Local Shack that she had abandoned her employment and breached the Fair Work Act. Lavanita later received a letter terminating her employment, partly because she had failed to turn up to work and had instead provided a medical certificate. The Local Shack also did not pay Lavanita her salary for her final 2 weeks of work, her accrued annual leave, or her notice period. Over the following months, she faced the risk of deportation, a deterioration in her marriage, and suicidal thoughts. In February 2018, I commenced proceedings in the federal court on behalf of Lavanita, alleging that Goldbreak Holdings Proprietary Limited and Bradley Wright had engaged in 7 contraventions of the Fair Work Act, including by sacking Lavanita because she took personal leave, misleading Lavanita by claiming she had abandoned her employment in breach of the Fair Work Act, and failing to pay Lavanita her salary, accrued annual leave, or notice period. A few weeks after the proceedings were served on Goldbreak Holdings, it was placed into voluntary administration. That had the effect that we could not continue the proceedings against it, even though the Local Shack's restaurants mysteriously continued to trade. Undeterred, Lovinita and I maintained the proceedings against Mr. Wright, who we claimed was personally liable as an accessory. Over the following months, Mr. Wright evaded service of the proceedings until the federal court granted substituted service. Mr. Wright then continued to ignore the proceedings. He would send me emails raising irrelevant matters but refused to file a defence. In the end, the federal court entered default judgment against Mr. Wright. In his judgments, Justice Colvin declared that Mr. Wright had committed the 7 contraventions of the Fair Work Act alleged. His Honour's findings against Mr. Wright were damning. He described Mr. Wright's conduct in sacking Lovinita for taking personal leave and refusing to pay her entitlements as considered and deliberate. His Honour noted that Lovinita was in a vulnerable position and at an economic disadvantage. Justice Colvin also found that Mr. Wright had used foul language and used Lovinita's need for a visa in a threatening way. Justice Colvin ordered Mr. Wright to personally pay Lovinita $28,000 in compensation and civil penalties for his contraventions, but of course he did not pay. In April 2019, I lodged a creditor's petition in the Federal Circuit Court requesting that Mr. Wright be declared bankrupt. After a further application for substituted service, Mr. Wright was finally declared bankrupt in June 2019 and a trustee appointed to administer his estate. However, after conducting its investigations, the trustee informed Lovinita that the house Mr. Wright lived in was in his mother's name, that the shares in the company that now ran the local shack were in his partner's name, and that he had no assets in his name other than about $1,000 in his bank account. To date, Lovinita has not been paid a cent of what she is owed by Bradley Wright. Despite that, the local shack continues to operate 4 restaurants in Perth, and Mr. Wright continues to identify himself as the local shack's operations manager on LinkedIn. The appalling behaviour of Mr. Wright and the local shack was covered in a series of articles published in WA Today in late 2019. The articles give countless examples of workers who were bullied, underpaid and mistreated by that business. I commend journalists Hamish Hastie and Hannah Barry for their reporting. There are few people that I hold in greater contempt than employers and managers who use their power to bully and exploit the vulnerable. Mr. Wright is a lawbreaker, a bankrupt and an unfit person to operate a business. I am therefore calling on him to accept responsibility for his actions and to pay Lovinita what she is owed. I hope that hearing Lovinita's story will cause every member of this place to reflect on the need for stronger workplace laws. I am pleased to be part of a government that has modernised our workplace health and safety laws and which is legislating tougher penalties for wage theft. I pay tribute to the former Minister for Industrial Relations, the Honourable Bill Johnston, for his work in those areas. I also hope that Lovinita's story will tell you a little about me. I am an idealist, but I am also a fighter. I am unforgiving when it comes to bullies, to those who abuse their power, to those who pick on the vulnerable and powerless. I am relentless in my pursuit of fairness and justice. I intend to bring all of those qualities to this place in pursuit of this government's agenda. This government took a platform to the election that was broad and forward-thinking. It has a strong mandate to deliver on that platform, but I know that it will do so responsibly. One of the pillars of this government's agenda, local manufacturing, is a key priority for me. For too long, governments around Australia have neglected our manufacturing industry, but this government has taken tangible action from the outset. In that respect, I acknowledge the excellent work of the Honourable Rita Safiotti in overseeing the construction of the railcar assembly facility in Bellevue. The Australian Marine Complex, adjacent to my electorate, was established by the last Labor government and is one of the great success stories of WA industry policy. The AMC is the only facility of its type in Australia, built as a common user facility to drive investment and collaboration in our defence and marine industries. I commend this government for the $87 million in infrastructure projects that it is rolling out at the AMC, including the vessel transfer path currently under construction. These investments will increase the AMC's capacity to take on more high-value projects and generate thousands of local jobs. I now look forward to working with the government on the next stage of development at the AMC. There are many opportunities. A heavy and wide load transfer path would allow the AMC to attract work fabricating and assembling large offshore structures. A second floating dock would enable the transfer of heavier vessels such as the Hunter-class frigates. Local manufacturing is at the heart of good jobs, which are in turn at the heart of social inclusion. I am very proud to be part of a union, the Australian Manufacturing Workers Union, and a government that understand that. There is a final part of my story that I feel compelled to share today, and that is my passion for improving mental health services. For me, that passion is deeply personal. Not long after I had left home at 17, I developed what I figured was an ordinary case of homesickness, but it quickly turned into something more sinister. I withdrew into myself. I would eat meals alone in my room. I stopped attending classes. I turned up late, dishevelled to work. I would sob almost inconsolably when I returned to Perth from the weekend away at home. I felt overwhelmed by everything in my life. I lost interest in most of the things I had previously enjoyed. I endlessly criticised myself and my work. I was diagnosed early on with major depression, but I accepted only patchy treatment. Eventually, at about 20 years old, I waded into the Swan River with the intention of drowning myself. Fortunately, I didn't get very far. After a course of antidepressants, my mood improved. I declared myself cured and I discontinued my medication. I fared all right on my own for another couple of years until my dad was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. Even then, I soldiered on, reasoning that a low mood was normal in my circumstances. However, a couple of years after Dad died, I realised that many of my old habits had crept back. Persistent sadness, lateness to work, a sense that I was overwhelmed. By then, I had the maturity to recognise that something was wrong and sought help. I've been on antidepressants for several years now. I seek treatment from my psychologist as and when it's needed, and I'm not ashamed to say it. During the election campaign, the former leader of the opposition made some startling admissions about his mental health. I congratulate him on doing so. It is beyond time that we break down the stigma around mental illness. Madam Speaker, may I seek an extension of time?
Extension granted.
Thank you. However, there was something missing from the conversation spurred by the former leader's comments. He seemed compelled to explain that his darkest times were behind him, that he was cured, and that there was nothing to worry about. I felt those comments missed the point, because it shouldn't be necessary to be cured in order to disclose struggles with your mental health. My message today is simple. It is okay to not be okay. Often, mental illness is not something to be gotten over or to be cured. It is something to be treated and managed. My depression is well managed, and it has been for several years. But it is something that requires constant vigilance and work. I expect to be on antidepressants for the rest of my life. There is no shame in that. I know that this is a government that is prioritising mental health, that is establishing additional mental health beds in our hospitals and fast-tracking the Young People's Priorities for Action program. There are also exciting projects happening in my electorate, including the new private mental health facility being built by Bethesda at Cockburn Central. I look forward to being part of that work going forward. I turn now to the campaign and to the many thank yous that I owe. The first of those must be to our Premier, the Honourable Mark McGowan. We have heard many tributes to the Premier over the last 2 days, but mine has a slightly different character. I would like to tell you about an experience that I had while door knocking in Atwell in the closing weeks of the campaign. On a sunny afternoon, I approached a house where a car had just pulled into the driveway. Out jumped 4 kids and 2 adults. A captive audience, I thought. A candidate's dream. As I chatted with the parents, the kids played around me, and they must have spied the slogan on the back of my shirt identifying me as being on Mark McGowan's team. My conversation was interrupted by a sing-song voice. "Do you know Mark McGowan?" I turned to the kids, knowing I at least had this one covered. "Yes, I know Mark McGowan," I said. "I'm running to be on his team," I continued like a well-rehearsed candidate. Question answered, I turned back to the parents, only to be interrupted almost immediately by another question. "Are you his best friend?" A cold sweat descended upon me. The jig was up. No, I replied. I wouldn't say I'm his best friend. There were frowns of disappointment all around. But the questions continued. Do you have his mobile number? Back on solid ground, I assured them that I did have the Premier's number. Of course, that was a mistake. Can you call him for us? The question came back. I delivered the disappointing news that it wasn't appropriate for me to call the Premier at that moment, quickly ended the conversation and got out of there before even trickier questions followed. I have never been involved in a campaign where so many voters, let alone children, recognise our leader. They respect him in a way that is unprecedented. It is a testament to the Premier's hard work in guiding our state through the pandemic. People have looked to the Premier to put their best interests first, and he has done so. I thank the Premier for that service on behalf of my constituents. There are so many other people to thank that I will no doubt miss someone, but I will do my best. To Melissa Park, thank you for inspiring me to take up a career in the law. To the member for Mount Lawley, Chris Prast and Alex Illich, thank you for your mentoring and friendship in the law. To Tim Picton and the whole team at WA Labor and CHQ, thank you for the brilliant campaign that you run. None of us would be sitting here today without you. To my campaign directors, Owen Whittle and the Honourable Kate Doust, thank you for your patience and strategic thinking. To the branch members and volunteers who helped on my campaign, a heartfelt thank you. I cannot name all of you, but I am particularly thankful to Glenn Anderson, Vasil Balakrishnan, Doreen Blythe, Dylan Davis, Tarun Dewan, Stephen Goodlett, Cassie Harrison, Karthik Pasamarthi and Brenda Toms, Julie Regan, Daniela Simatos, and Robbie and Jean Bruce. Thank you to my many friends for your camaraderie over the years. Alex Cassie, Claire, Craig and Mima Comrie, Rebecca Doyle, Tim Goyder, Pearl Lim, Tom Palmer and Mike Workman. And thank you particularly to my oldest friend, Ashley Buck. To Peter O'Keefe, Ben Harris and the Shop Distributive and Allied Employees Union, thank you for your support of a cross-factional ally. I wish to congratulate the SDA and Dustin Rafferty on their recent victory in the Industrial Appeal Court. The court declared earlier this week that state employees in the retail pharmacy industry are covered by the State Shop and Warehouse Award, closing a loophole that some employers had used to pay low wages. And I also congratulate the former Minister for Industrial Relations who intervened in that matter in support. Thank you to Mick Buchan, Steve Catania and the Construction, Forestry, Maritime, Mining and Energy Union for your support over many years and during the campaign. I give particular thanks to my two unions, the Australian Services Union and the Australian Manufacturing Workers Union. To Wayne Wood and Jill Hugo, thank you for letting me cut my teeth as an ASU delegate and placing such great trust in me as your advocate in recent years. The ASU has achieved marvellous outcomes for its members under your leadership. To Steve McCartney, Glenn McLaren and the whole AMWU caucus, there is no possibility that I can ever repay your solidarity. The AMWU is a leader in this state of driving industrial, political and social reforms, and I am proud to be part of that work. Thank you to the current and former members of Parliament who have supported me over the last 15 years, including the Honourable John Ford, the Honourable Alana Clossy, the Honourable Stephen Dawson, Senator Louise Pratt, Josh Wilson MP, the member for Murray Wellington and the member for Kingsley. I'm going to continue to rely on each of you. Thank you to my field organiser and de facto campaign manager, Darcy Gunning. The campaign he ran was so good that I had to take him aside and tell him that we were at risk of being told off for doing too good a job in a non-target seat. Mate, you are a complete legend. Now there is a group of people to whom I must give a very special thank you. There is the person who has been essential in shaping my political and moral compass. She has been my friend and mentor for many years. I owe a debt of not merely gratitude, but of great love to the Honourable Dr. Sally Talbot. Sally, thank you for seeing the potential in me all those years ago, for being generous with your time and advice, and for your love for my family. My family has always been important to me. I would not be here without my family's support. To my parents-in-law, Anthony and Shelley, and to the whole Whittaker family, thank you for letting me be part of your clan. To my sister and brother-in-law, Elizabeth and Jonathan, and to my beautiful niece, Lana, thank you for your love and support. To my mum and dad, Catherine and Roy, thank you for raising me and instilling in me Labor values and a love for public service. Mum, while Dad isn't with us anymore, I know that he would be so proud of all of us. And finally, to the most important person in my life, my wife, Ellie, I have two things to say. First, I am sorry that I forgot to mention you in my election night speech. As the member for Kalgoorlie said to me, that is doghouse stuff. Please consider this a grovelling apology etched into Hansard. I am sure it is not the first. Second, thank you for loving me unconditionally, forgiving my mistakes, and seeing my better side when I often don't. In our almost 10 years together, we have achieved so much. Thank you for being my partner in life and my partner in political crime. I love you very much. Honourable members, you will often see me wearing a lapel pin, as I am today, with a depiction of Ben Chifley's Light on the Hill, the objective of the Labor Party in bringing better conditions for all people without hope of personal gain. The pin is a tribute to my beloved dad, who wore the same pin and who strove always to give a helping hand. The Light on the Hill is the great work of the Labor Party in this place. That work is never done, and our eyes should never be distracted from it. I am excited by the prospect of what this Parliament can achieve, and I look forward to working with each and every one of you to deliver a stronger, fairer and more equal Western Australia.